Bank heists.
But she had a great ass! And your head was all the way up it. Give me all you got!
If I were to ask you what one of your favorite movies would be, if you had a top 10, chances are Heat by Michael Mann would come to mind. I hate that question personally when people are like, hey, what's your favorite movie ever? It's a really hard question because there's so many great movies out there. And Heat is one of those movies. From the realism, the directing, the shots, the cinematography, and the compelling story, along with the very good firearms gunplay, it quickly became one of my favorite movies after watching it. And on this episode of Administrative Results, we're going to break down not only the movie, the history, and even where life imitates art. Now, Heat was made in 1995 by Michael Mann. Michael Mann has got to be becoming one of my favorite directors. He seems to have a very good attention to detail when it matters, especially revolving around firearms, and I, being a rather large firearms enjoyer, really do appreciate that. Heat stars Al Pacino, Robert De Niro, Val Kilmer. Now, Heat would be the first time that Al Pacino and Robert De Niro will be on a film working together in the same scene. And though their real-life politics could probably be trash, them as actors are pretty good. Dealing with the gun space, I will caveat that typically within our genre and our political zeitgeist, a lot of the times we don't align with the Hollywood narrative.
Enough.
Enough. Enough. Enough.
Now I can totally detach all of that and enjoy a movie when it is totally good. I can detach the artist from the art, and I don't mind. Because with this film, they really did their due diligence in making a fantastic movie. Now, this movie also resonates with me in a lot of ways. I spent 2 years as a police officer, and I thought my life when I was a cop was gonna be a lot more like Heat, and spoiler, it wasn't. Hey Colton, you know what Heat stands for?
No, what is it?
I'm gonna murder you. I thought my life as a cop was gonna be much cooler. Turns out it's just a lot of boring, mundane stuff, and you don't have criminals often pulling major scores in your area. Who would have known? They never tell me that stuff. In the academy, they'll train you up to the idea of this crazy stuff, and in theory it could happen, but statistically speaking, it just never happens. And if it does happen, you're not there for the exciting stuff. You're off work or sleeping because you work a graveyard shift, and criminals, the good criminals, they have respectable working hours in most cases. I'm making some of this up.
Admin from the future with no mustache that needs to make money. Getting into credit card debt is easy. Getting out of it, well, that's the hard part. The system is set up so we don't get out of debt. If you're struggling with credit cards, personal loans, collections, or medical bills, you need to check out PDS Debt. PDS provides a service to match you with debt solutions tailored to your financial situation. If you're making payments every month on your debt and your balances aren't going down, PDS has solutions for you. Everyone with $10,000 or more in eligible debt qualifies, and there's no minimum credit score required. Bad or fair credit is accepted. Save more while paying off your debt in a fraction of the time. I've had debt before, and I don't like it. And I'm happy a service like PDS Debt exists. Stop waiting and start saving. Get a free debt analysis right now at pdsdebt.com/results. It only takes 30 seconds. pdsdebt.com/results.
So the real life history of Heat is actually based off of true events that took place in the 60s. Neil McCauley, born in 1914, that would spend up to 25 years in prison, 8 of those in Alcatraz, was released and headed up to Chicago. Now at Alcatraz, Neil McCauley would also spend up to 4 years in solitary confinement. Solitary confinement does not sound like a pleasant way to spend your incarceration. I have no doubt in my mind this would form a lot of the beliefs and basis of how they would approach life after they got out, especially if they're going to continue down committing scores. Kind of the thought process of, I will not go back to prison no matter the cost. You will have to kill me before you put me back in prison. So this increases the danger for the cops that have to deal with you. Now, Neil was a professional criminal. He was a hardened and well-disciplined man, and Chicago was where he liked to be. Now, Chuck Adams is supposed to represent Vincent Hanna. Chuck Adams was also part of the Chicago PD. He was a part of the detective unit that handled criminal cases such as Neil's, high-end bank robberies, homicides of the sort. And they are supposed to mirror each other. Both very disciplined at their craft and what they do, even so to the detriment of their personal lives. At the time, Chuck Adams had a marriage that was apparently falling apart, and he would even run into Neil and ask him to a cup of coffee. This would inspire the real-life movie scene where Hanna and McCauley would sit down over a cup of coffee, where they discover that they have more in common than they realize. Now, Chuck Adams was a part of the major crimes unit at Chicago PD, and there was a string of robberies going around at the department stores, and he suspected that Neil McCauley was behind it. So after infiltrating his gang, they put around-the-clock surveillance on Neil's crew, and they had a disciplined stakeout in one of the stores where they had detectives inside. And Neil McCauley and his gang infiltrated into the basement, and they heard the detectives upstairs move across the room, apparently maybe to use the restroom. It alerted them, and at which point they dropped. This would also inspire a scene in the movie when Neil McCauley in the film is on a heist while Val Kilmer's inside drilling. Neil is doing security on the outside. Now in the movie, they're inside of sort of a truck container pulling surveillance, and it takes a lot of discipline to sit there and just be quiet and don't move. Hours and hours and hours. One of the cops gets up, and as he sits down in another spot to get more comfortable, his M16 slams against the wall of the container that they're in, alerting Neil, at which point he says the heist is off and they bounce out. Of course, they could have grabbed him there, but Hannah knew it was going to be some misdemeanors and wasn't going to put these guys away for a long time. The juice wasn't worth the squeeze. Now, Chuck Adams also respected this. He realized that these guys were very disciplined, willing to drop anything at the sign of trouble because they knew the risk. Now, eventually they were following the guys enough and they would have their famous shootout in real life at a department store. The guys were inside doing a heist when the department store was cashing checks. They decided that they didn't want to have a shootout with a lot of innocent bystanders inside there, even though they had detectives in the store. They waited for them to leave, at which point the gunfight was instigated and Neil ended up dying. Now, Chuck Adams eventually met up with Michael Mann, and this story caught Michael Mann's attention. Michael Mann would go on to create like a TV movie spot of this in the 80s. It's kind of cool if you watch some of it, but it's not as good as Heat would be. And eventually in the 90s, in 1995, we got Heat. I mean, you gotta think Michael Mann just came off of Last of the Mohicans, a fantastic movie starring Daniel Day-Lewis. It's one of my favorite movies as well. I mean, it's really hard to beat Last of the Mohicans. Very, very good, but we're not talking about Last of the Mohicans. Don't let me get sidetracked. So I'm sure the studios saw the success with Michael Mann's movie and they thought, okay, yeah, we have maybe some lightning in a bottle with this guy, let's give him Heat. And of course, it's another banger. So maybe the timing of that just worked out into Michael Mann's favor after proving that he has the gumption and the skill to direct. I'm sure he was already a credited director, but I'm just assuming this is how Hollywood works. So Michael Mann would get to direct Heat. What I love about the movie is the level of care and due diligence that went into it. Michael Mann would even spend time along the LAPD doing ride-alongs for months. He would hire on technical advisors that were former SAS, I believe Andy McNabb. And Andy, of course, is going to bring a very good attention to detail with his SAS experience to the big screen. There was a lot of live fire training that the actors underwent. There's footage of Robert De Niro running around the flat range doing shooting drills. There's pictures of him wearing his famous suit with the heat rig. Shout out to the Commando store. They actually sent me the heat rig for doing my own heists. In case YouTube fails, I can go. Which, speaking of YouTube failing, there's been a lot of new policy updates on YouTube where they are just cracking down on firearms-centric content. Stuff that is completely legal that will be kind of pee-pee slapped on YouTube. So to get around this, I would encourage you to check out Pepperbox. Pepperbox is going to be like Netflix, but for your gun-centered content. It has a lot of other big creators on there. Creators such as Brandon Herrera, Grow Anthem, Donut Operator, Angry Cops, Kentucky Ballistics, and I'm on there. If you enjoy my content, there will be exclusive content on there as well. Stuff that we can't necessarily do on YouTube, and we don't have to dance around YouTube rules. It's $8 a month, and nothing about it is going to change how I conduct YouTube videos, but it's going to be another venue of approach that we can do content on there without worry about these massive corporations interfering with how we get to do content. So I'd encourage you to go check it out.
Get set.
I am.
Now, the movie starts out with the crew doing an armored car robbery where they take a lot of bearer bonds. And this is where the fun begins with the gunplay, as well as the tactics used. You can see the technical proficiency with Robert De Niro's, from now on I can say Neil McCauley. We're not talking about the Neil McCauley of the past. Well, movie Neil McCauley. So with movie Neil McCauley's crew, we can see that the technical proficiency is very high. They are well versed in their trade craft. And there's one thing that I really appreciate about it, because low-level crime isn't as sexy. High-level crime you can make movies about. Low-level crime is just sad. High-level crime is kind of like that, but it's a lot more skill involved, and it makes for much better movies and much more compelling antagonists. Neil's crew is exactly that. Now, Neil's crew for this heist consists of Charito, Chirilis, Trujillo, and the one-off guy that is kind of like rotating in is going to be Waingro. Now, Waingro would, of course, be a massive scumbag and doesn't apply to their criminal morals. For this heist, that's the crew. They pull it off with excellence and ease, but they end up having to smoke all the armored guards because Waingro decides to smoke one guy. If you're in for a penny, you're in for a pound. You don't want any witnesses, so they finish off the rest of the crew with high technical proficiency and brutally at that with a 308 FAL with one of the guys doing Mozambique, to the body, one to the head. especially on concrete. As someone that shot ballistic dummies with an FAL, typically you get a very large splatter. And especially if someone's laid on the ground and you shoot them point blank in the head with an FAL, there's probably not going to be a lot of head left, as that round also bounces off with the pressure from the pavement. It would be a lot gruesomer, I think. Anyway, that's a side tangent. You didn't ask for it, but it's one that I noticed, and probably for better in like everyone's sanity, they left out of the movie. So then of course, they want to dispatch Waingro. Disclaimer, I'm not going to go through the entire movie because that's going to take forever, but after this all goes down, they want to dispatch Waingro because they realize he's a loose end and a piece of trash. But funny enough, when they go to dispatch him, there's like cops nearby, so they stop, and then Waingro scurries off, but then Robert De Niro doesn't hear him scurry until the cops leave, which I was curious, if you're in a high-stress situation where you're about to murder someone, would you hear them scurry off? But anyway. The detective that's countering Neil, that's kind of mirrors him in personality, is going to be Vincent Hanna. So based off of the firearms choice and the movie hints, it's speculated that Detective Hanna is a prior Marine Corps officer. During this time point, with Neil and Detective Hanna at their ages in the movie being in their 40s, doing the math, we could probably trace back that they would have been of age to fight in the Vietnam conflict. With Neil being in prison, he probably missed the Vietnam conflict, but with Detective Hanna, it's probably a safe bet that at some point he could have been in Vietnam. Now, this isn't elaborated on, so it's not implausible. That's where I'm kind of pulling it from. So Detective Hanna would have a lot of experience in this world. He's on his third marriage that's failing, and this is also a common trend that I saw when I was in law enforcement. A lot of guys, even when I was in, that I knew would have marriages that fall apart. They'd get divorced, or they're talking to dispatchers. Typically with guys that get paid to carry guns in government service, their marriages just fall apart. It's just kind of a brutal nature of the beast due to the lifestyle, the level of commitment it takes to your craft. On the flip side of that, with Macaulay, he is someone that has no personal love life, as opposed to other guys in his crew where they have families and kids. Neil is very disciplined.
Don't let yourself get attached to anything you are not willing to walk out on in 30 seconds flat if you feel the heat around the corner.
And he would go on to break his golden rules. Another thing going on in the country at the time is we have the assault weapons ban of 1994, which would be lifted in 2004. And this would impact a lot of gun culture. Now, I was born in 96, so I existed during the assault weapons ban, but I would have been in diapers, and none of this would have resonated with my head whatsoever. I'm a child. Why would I care about guns at this point? So I was curious if any of this played into the aspect of the guns used and or the thought process or the prop house firearms. Typically with prop house firearms, they fall under different guidance and regulations, even though they still adhere to the ATF and NFA, yada, yada, yada. Fast forwarding the movie to the Overwatch scene for the handoff with the bearer bonds. You can see Val Kilmer rocking an HK91. The HK91 being an import from the German G3, missing the paddle. We did a whole video on it, and I thoroughly enjoy the firearm, and I think it's a really cool choice that they employed in the movie. Chris would be using that gun in Overwatch style with the bipod deployed, but he wouldn't have a magnified optic, though they had a lot of magnified clip-on optics for the HK series of firearms. I found that always to be a little bit peculiar if they're doing some sort of Overwatch, given they are working within pretty close space for a battle rifle. I would have guessed they were within 100 yards, at most maybe 200 yards. So that's a very doable shot for someone with a battle rifle, especially with the bipod. But of course, we all know that scene would end up devolving into a gunfight, and they would take out those guys, and it would kind of seal the fate of Van Zandt. Who am I talking to? A dead man.
I don't understand.
Fantastic. I'm taking this off real quick. So this is a totally random fact I learned when I was doing my research for Heat. While Val Kilmer was filming for The Doors in 1991, he fell off a stage and the stuntman was supposed to catch him, but he ended up breaking his arm. So he has a weird growth there. I remember seeing it in the movie. I was like, why does Val Kilmer have a massive bump on his arm? And then I did the research note. That's why. The more you know. So Hanna, because he got the tip of Slick, he was working Shootout, and I love Hanna's character, man. It's rumored when they were working on the character that he would chip cocaine. He always has this edge. He's always a little bit erratic.
I'm Donald Duck. So you got something to tell me or what?
They don't talk about it in the movie, but that's how they envisioned him. Al Pacino ran with that for his character, and that's why he's a bit eccentric on film at times, is that he was chipping cocaine to give him that edge. He's got, I always got to have that edge.
It keeps me sharp. On the edge, where I gotta be.
She had a great ass, and your head was all the way up it. Give me all you got! Give me all you got! I love that. I love that more than you know.
That'd be so terrifying if you were like a young cop and then there was a lieutenant on their elite crime unit that was, unbeknownst to you guys, chipping cocaine and just being crazy. That guy probably has no tolerance for new guy shenanigans whatsoever, being on the force for so long, on his third marriage that's on the downslope. That guy would be terrifying to work with, but also would be a blast in a tree. It'd be hilarious. It would be so funny. You guys would be talking about, hey, remember when Hannah said that that chick had a great ass to that one guy?
That was locker room talk.
They're trailing Macaulay's guys. It's a pretty sick scene for like cop stuff. Is he's in a helicopter over the city and he's like, hey, drop me off. And they give him a car and he chases down Macaulay. I don't think you realize and guys appreciate just how cool that is. I know it's in a movie where things are just often blown out of proportion and way over top. But from a working standpoint, getting to ride around in a helicopter over the city of LA and then drop me off here, give me a car. That's pretty sick, dude. That's pretty cool. I appreciate that a lot because helicopters are freaking cool. Getting to ride in helicopters is always a treat. That working environment would be sick. I don't care who you are. It's pretty cool. So he chases down Macaulay. He's like, hey, let's grab some coffee.
What do you say I buy you a cup of coffee?
Now, this is a big deal because Robert De Niro and Al Pacino are working a scene together for the first time in cinema history. Two giants in the filmmaking industry. It's even said that they didn't rehearse the scene prior. They wanted to go into it feeling like they didn't know the other guy. They're trying to feel the guy out and plan the footing. And I like that a lot from a filmmaking perspective. I appreciate movies a lot. I don't appreciate the Hollywood industry, but I appreciate the artistic avenue, especially as someone that tries to bring that into YouTube for you guys. So it's always fun to get that inspiration. I know it's kind of nerdy, and it's like, hey, dude, just talk about guns, but it's like, hey, I wanna make good stuff for my boys. I love this scene because, like the real life example, they come to the realization that they have a lot in common. They're just on two different sides of the law. And that kind of speaks to a lot of criminal activity when you start to get to the more professional guys. Having talked to guys that used to be in gangs or motorcycle gangs or other organized crime, they would often talk about there's a strict rules, there's a hierarchy, there's a sense of code and honor. They just happen to be not wearing a badge and getting paid. They're paid through criminal activity. Now with Macaulay, he has a strict set of discipline, he has rules, he has a sense of honor, and he's also very proficient. He's undeniable at what he does. With Hannah, it's the same thing. He has the LAPD, he's been there for years, he locks guys up, and he can see himself in Macaulay. And they have that infamous thing where it's like, if I see you, I'm gonna have to put you down. If it's between you and some poor bastard that you're gonna turn into a widow, brother, I am putting you down. And Macaulay's like, same. And it's a pretty heavy scene. It's like, hey, why don't you just get out of here? Even in the real life example, Chuck Adams was asking Macaulay, like, why don't you leave Chicago and go do this somewhere else? And he's like, I like Chicago. And they can tell that they're so dedicated to their trade craft. That's just what they do. Now, as the film progresses, they eventually get to the lead up to the final heist, where they're trying to steal $12 million in cash from a bank.
When these guys walk out the door of whatever score they're gonna take next, they're gonna have the surprise of a lifetime.
Now this meet is compromised and Detective Hannah gets a drop on the guys and it turns into a rolling gunfight throughout the streets of LA. And it's kind of demonstrated in the movie when they get ambushed by the cops, they return fire, and not just semi-automatic, but they return fully automatic fire. And this is pretty smart on their end because they're essentially encountering an ambush. One of the doctrines in the military is you encounter an ambush, you have kind of like two options. It's like depending on if it's a near ambush or a far ambush. If it's a near ambush, your pretty much only option is either die or assault through and kill and close the gap with just overwhelming fire. Because they have the drop on you, and chances are if you hesitate or do anything, they're gonna kill and close the gap with you. Just out of instinct and training, most likely, they go with the fight their way through it, and they have no option. Like it's not like just one cop that's shooting at them and chasing them down. It's like probably a whole squad and Detective Hannah's guys that are hunting these guys. So a selector switch to full auto and they start shooting their way through the ambush. And of course, the driver gets killed. This scene is probably one of the best scenes in cinema for a rolling gunfight and just gunfights in general. It is very highly regarded. There's a famous thing where
Val Kilmer is firing forward, turning, firing back, and then doing a reload. They use that at Fort Bragg. 95% of you will not be able to fire as well as this actor.
They showed the movie to new recruits in boot camp, and I'm sure maybe some of you guys saw it out there at the time. I'm not sure if it's still a thing, but they're saying this is how you shoot, move, and communicate and reload on the fly. I even heard, like, when Val Kilmer was talking about this, or even telling stories about how you better be able to reload and shoot better than these freaking actors. I love that level of attention to detail. There's even, like, for the practical effects, where bullet holes are entering into the cop cars and you see the exit hole. In my brain, I'm like racking, like, how do they do this? Because they don't use CGI in this movie. There's like one scene where they use a green screen and it's just for a cityscape. So I'm like racking my brain if they did it for that, if it was just a practical effect. My dumb YouTuber mind can't comprehend the level of detail. Now with the blanks used, they actually would take the audio from the gunfight in the city.
Nothing artificial or could come close to delivering the way the sound ricocheted off the walls of the buildings of an empty downtown.
And with filming in LA, they would have to do it all like on an off day, so it's slow, and then they'd shut the street down, and so they'd have to do it over and over and over again on those days. So they have to tear down, set back up, tear down. It's a really impressive feat of filmmaking, and it's one that I regard very highly. I think the level of technicality, the shooting and moving is just chef's kiss. Now the firearms choices in there I find rather interesting, being the Colt 733, mainly used by Chris and Neil, but then Shootout would have a Galil arm. Another thing is Hannah's gun, which is going to be the FNF&C. How would a detective in the LAPD get an FNF&C? I mean, we've shot one of those before technically. I've shot them before also in full auto and semi-automatic, and they're very nice guns. They're very cool. They're often a very sought after firearm. This one's also like the one where you rack your brain, like really, like how Detective Hannah, how'd you get an FNF&C for the LAPD? Who knows? In the 90s, they were getting all sorts of guns. Maybe they're trying them out. Maybe the LAPD was like, hey, you know, the Swedes have this cool gun. Maybe we give it a shot. Maybe check it out. And then Detective Hannah, being a lieutenant, is like, you know what? I want this for my personal gun because it's cool. I don't know. I love it though. Why wouldn't he have some sort of, you know, M16 or another Colt 733 himself? I don't care. It's sick. I'm allowed to think it's cool. It's cool. Objectively, it's cool. Typically in law enforcement, the cops are used to having overwhelming firepower. Being on calls and seeing it firsthand, it's like you may have 5 cops dealing with one guy, and there is just overwhelming superior force in numbers. It's really, really rare in law enforcement, and it's usually a well-documented cases where the suspect would have better armament than the police. And when it does happen, it really does jack up the police. There are many cases in law enforcement, starting with one of the topics I want to talk about in this video, the 1997 Hollywood shootout, where cops realized they were outgunned. And that kind of rocked the law enforcement world and would kind of set the stage for better armament throughout the country. It would still happen throughout the 2000s and 2010s. So typically law enforcement isn't used to that level of highly technically proficient criminals having better firepower. And then the 3 guys bail out and they start on foot to get away. So they steal $12 million, roughly $12 million in cash. If it's all $100 bills, if they split the money 3 ways between the money they had to carry, each guy's carrying, you know, roughly, so I did the weight calculator on that much cash, being $4 million is gonna weigh 88 pounds. So along with your rifle, your mags, which that stuff's not too heavy. We're on the heat rig, fully loaded with a 11.5-inch gun. Shootout would be suffering with his Galil arm, but the adrenaline would be like, you don't notice the weight of that. 88 pounds to carry of dead weight around probably your hip area while you're trying to move, shoot, and communicate would be pretty taxing. If you've done any sort of shooting competition like I have, you would know wearing kit and doing that stuff while you're trying to shoot and think under pressure is challenging and taxing, and I'm not even getting shot at those competitions. So a bunch of LAPD cops shooting at you would definitely add to a very fatiguing experience. Shootout is probably the most out of shape of the crew. Surrealist and McCauley look pretty like in shape. I mean, McCauley's kind of getting old. Shootout is probably the best in shape of the guys. They would have been under a lot of taxing weight. I'm sure in the movie, like for practicality of filming over and over, they didn't have the actual weight in there. Funny enough, Ian McCollum of Forgotten Weapons, he demoed this on his channel, trying to do shooting drills with that much weight, and he was like, dude, the weight, this is a massive amount of weight that you have to carry. I think we'll even try it for this video, just to show it IRL. That's a lot of poundage. Shirless would also get wounded, so now McCauley has to worry about Shirless, and it just like compounds the level of, oof, this is not going good. So we're out filming for another video right now, but I wanted to demo the weight of the cash that McCauley would have been carrying during the heist. And if there is anything that's the most unrealistic about the movie, it would probably be this. How they so easily wield and run around with 90 pounds worth of cash on their person. It's a testament to maybe some adrenaline that you get, but I will say it is very unwieldy. The 2 dumbbells I have in here bring us up to 90, got a 70 and a 20-pound dumbbell. And I'm gonna show you just how godforsaken this is. So watch me suffer, I guess. Also, it's like 100+ degrees out. I hate you. Okay, we're here for the bank's money, not your money. Your money is federally insured. Oh, your money is federally insured. There's a squat to put it on. Oh, oh God. Oh no, cops. Moving! Move! Chris, I'm out of ammo! Why did Shootout bring a Galil? It's so weird! Bro, the money ain't worth it.
I'm gonna tell you right now, you ain't skipping along how fast they're moving with 90 pounds. Oh. I bet you wish you had this sick Omani DPM jacket. Well, you could have had it if you were paying attention to Americana Pipe Dream Apparel. This exclusive camo is a great example of stuff that they get in all the time. Milsurp that is sought after from obscure countries that you didn't even know existed. Did you even know this existed, Colton?
I had no idea.
Of course you had no idea, because it's obscure. Who would know Omani DPM existed unless you're a true aficionado? This is just a small inkling of their potential as young Zoomers in the Milsurp space. So of course, a big thank you to Americana Pipe Dream Apparel for sponsoring this video. God bless them, and God bless America. So the methodology with the gunshot sound effects, with how good they sounded in the cityscape, would it be even used when they would film Collateral? When Tom Cruise would shoot for like that scene where it's like, yo homie, is that my briefcase?
Is that my briefcase? Huh?
They would take those blank fire shots and apply that audio to the film itself without doing any sort of like special effects afterwards. And I think it's another cool thing for the gun guy crowd. For us, for me and you. Yo homie, is that my briefcase? Well, if you like what we got going on here, we'll definitely cover Collateral, so if you're not subscribed, I encourage you to be subscribed. There's always fun projects we're working here on the channel, so you might want to stick around and find out. Smash that like button, hit the subscribe! I think there's often a romantic notion guys have of like, you know, if everything fails, I'm just gonna go rip a bank. But then all the implications of that, looking over your shoulder, worrying about, is today gonna be the day when I get rolled up on by the heat? Imagine living that lifestyle where you have no peace. Now, if you play for the house, if you're a cop or if you're for the military, where your criminal organization is the establishment, then you have a certain sense of peace where, yeah, you may know that those guys could kill you, but you got life insurance. You're not worried about going to prison unless you do something criminally egregious yourself. You have a sense of peace about you. What would it be like to be on the other side of the coin? How would you conduct yourself as a criminal? What sort of morality would you abide by? You're already breaking the law, which goes against a lot of religious codes and ethics. What else would you play into? In for a penny, in for a pound. Now, after the heist, Macaulay gets away. Sharito's been killed, which is kind of a sad thing, but Sharito kind of, it's like the actions of your own consequences. Sharito being a family guy, he had a bunch of other investments and properties that were making him money, but he just loved the juice. You know, for me, the action is the juice. I gotta give it to Tom Sizemore. I think he's a pretty good actor. As someone that was in law enforcement, a lot of the fun came from the dangerous stuff. Like, my wife would not be happy hearing that I went through this. Like, that's like the fun stuff, the action. The paperwork that follows isn't the most fun part, but, you know, your 5 seconds of fun, fellas, is always like the juice. And that applies to a lot of those jobs. Military, law enforcement, that action is the juice. Typically, it's why a lot of guys join up. So I get it. That's why people love to go skydiving. The danger is exhilarating. Now, of course, Macaulay would get Shirley's medical attention. They would go their separate ways, and Macaulay, having developed a romantic connection, would try and get her to come with her. She eventually says yes, and as they're leaving, everything is in line. Macaulay, with his moral code, has to close the gap with two guys, Van Sant and Waingro.
Look at me.
And this would be his code of honor, where it would kind of put the nail in his coffin, because if he could just let it go and leave, he would have gotten off scot-free and would have been in Fiji with $4 million and a beautiful woman. But due to his code of honor, he has to go and finish what he started. And he finds Waingro and he smokes Waingro. Now the problem is that that's where Hannah catches up with Macaulay when he goes to smoke Waingro. Hannah would then chase down Macaulay, culminating in the final shootout, a very heavy scene, beautifully shot scene too. And it's one of those scenes where you feel it, like you just feel it in your core, because Hannah smokes Macaulay, and he smokes a guy that so perfectly understood him as well, just happens to be on the other side of the law. And it's like that powerful scene as he's dying, he like takes his hand, and Hannah has to be there and just like, oh dude. It's a pretty heavy scene, and it's a beautiful ending to the movie. Shirilis gets out pretty scot-free. His girl, his old lady that was a prostitute that he ends up, fellas, life advice. I wouldn't encourage you marrying a prostitute. So Shirilis would see his old girl in the custody of the cops, and she waves him off, and he bounces out, and he probably gets off scot-free.
Let him go. Roger. Thank you very much. Have a good evening.
He is formless. He is like water. He doesn't have this strict moral code where he has to go close any loose ends. He can get away scot-free.
Now, Heat is one of those movies that I think impacted not just me, but a lot of people with the practicality, with the storyline. They're also rumored to be making a Heat 2 starring Austin Butler, and I think it's also rumored that Adam Driver is going to be playing it as well. It's supposed to be a prequel to the actions of the 1995 movie. I haven't read the book yet. I plan to. I've been dragging my feet, but I'd encourage you to go check it out because I want to check it out. I'm hoping it's good, and I'm hoping the on-screen adaptation will be another banger. It will be tough though because I'm sure Michael Mann will have a lot of expectations to make another awesome movie. I have faith in him to do it though, so fingers crossed it won't suck. I think it's also rumored that Ana de Armas is supposed to be in that one. So how could it be bad? Can't. You look like a good Joe. Now, Heat didn't just impact people as a good movie. I think a lot of criminals also saw it and were like, oh, this is how we take down an armored car. There was a lot of different crimes going throughout like South Africa, Colombia, Denmark, Norway, according to Wikipedia. I'm looking at Wikipedia. It's a little cheat sheet. And of course, a North Hollywood shootout in 1997. One of the guys, Phillips, apparently they found a copy of Heat on their VCR at their residence. Now, the 1997 North Hollywood shootout would rock the world of law enforcement. So Phillips and Emil, being the two suspects, would hit a North Hollywood bank, come out, they would have a massive shootout that lasted 44 minutes. The suspects would injure 12 police officers and 8 civilians, and they were armed to the teeth. A lot of the cops on patrol were armed with handguns or maybe shotguns, and the suspects were armed with pretty much assault rifles and or battle rifles, the HK-91. The HK-91 being in Heat itself. And the AK was also in Heat. One of the guys had a Norinco. They also had a dissipator, which kind of was in Heat as well, and they fired over 2,000 rounds during the exchange. Eventually the suspects were stopped as SWAT guys showed up with M16s and they smoked both the suspects. This would reshape a lot of how law enforcement approached these high stress situations. Before, law enforcement really didn't have a lot of like long guns in the form of 5.56 in their employ, and if they were, they're typically used by SWAT teams. In my time in law enforcement, which would have been over 20 years later, I was using an AR-15 as my patrol rifle. You'd have it as a duty carry. Typically we carried them unchambered in the rack in your patrol car, and you were trained pretty heavily on it. We even had LPVO training that would go into it for making precise, accurate shots in case of a hostage situation. Guys used to have revolvers, and they got semi-automatic handguns and shotguns, and then eventually they would get like carbines to use on patrol. As criminals and their tech advance, so too does law enforcement have to match and keep up with that. There of course are rare instances where patrol guys had like full auto MP5s, and there's that one guy that did like a mag dump into a car that was like rolling by. Typically though, most cops nowadays are gonna have an AR-15 or maybe in some cases a 300 blackout. I think it's even rumored like cops in Alaska like will have AKs because they work a lot better in the cold. I would say that the 1997 North Hollywood shootout is that instance where life imitates art. These two probably got inspired from the movie thinking they could pull off a crazy heist, and they realized, hey, maybe life's not like a movie, as they get swarmed by the LAPD. And then they subsequently would get smoked. I think one thing that personally resonated me with Heat the most was during the diner scene with Macaulay and Hannah, where they're asking each other, you know, have you ever thought about a normal type life, barbecues and ball games? And it's like, normal type life, what the hell is that? And I think for a lot of men, it resonates on a deep level, where you're staring down the barrel of 20 plus years of a 9 to 5. In some cases, for a lot of guys, you don't retire until you're in your 60s, and you spend a lot of time just working a normal job that would be considered very boring. And inside of you is this yearning for adventure, yearning for a different life, an escape from the normality and the mundane. And it's a common thing amongst a lot of the movies that we talk about. Would you rather live a life of comfy, safe normality, or would you rather live a life of dangerous adventure? And ultimately, it's up to you. I guess I'm gonna keep making YouTube videos though. Gentlemen, I appreciate you tuning in to watch me yap about the movie Heat. Chances are, if you're like me, it's one of your all-time favorite movies, and I, of course, had to get it out of my system by making a video about it. I have nothing else for you. As always, I'll catch you on the flip.